and it's also quite hot. So thank you for being here. My name is Holly Wise. I am the Program Operations Manager at the Solutions Journalism Network. This is my first visit to IJF, and it's been quite a thrill so far, and I'm really glad to be here with you all talking about one of my favorite things, which is my passion, solutions journalism. And most importantly, it's an honor and a privilege of mine to be here with the panelists who are also friends and colleagues. So thank you all. I wanted to start by giving just a brief overview of what solutions journalism is, understanding that this is a definition of solutions journalism as defined by the Solutions Journalism Network. And the educator in me likes to make sure that we are all on the same foundational point of view, understanding what we're talking about when we talk about solutions journalism. So I'm going to read this slide that's above me right now. Solutions journalism is rigorous reporting with evidence and insights about how communities, people, groups, or governments are responding to social problems. And what you'll hear today from our panelists are key examples of how solutions journalism is practiced within their communities, specifically as it relates to equity and inclusion. Solutions journalism is a way to achieve equity and inclusion because solutions journalism focuses on solutions to social issues, including the ones concerning equity and inclusion. It investigates and explains in a critical and clear-eyed way how people try to solve widely shared problems. And I think one thing that you'll hear today from the panelists is that we all in our communities are trying to solve similar or the same problems, and hopefully our shared knowledge can create a path forward as we're all working to discover and uncover shared problems, solutions to our problems. There are quite a number of solution stories about what's working to help people overcome barriers to inclusion, and you'll hear some of those examples today. I will now turn it over to Caleb, who will talk about Minority Africa.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Caleb Okereke, and I'm a Nigerian journalist, and most of my work has been in Eastern Africa. And while I was working in Eastern Africa, I kind of noticed the sort of like the underrepresentation and misrepresentation of minorities in mainstream media. And I thought, oh, what can I do about it, right? And the answer was Minority Africa. And in the next few minutes, I'll be telling you a bit about who we are and what we do and how it connects to solutions journalism and why that's particularly important for people who belong to marginalized groups. So Minority Africa fundamentally is a digital publication, and we kind of use data-driven and immersive multimedia journalism to tell minority solution stories from across Africa and also covered by minorities, right? And so we think it's very crucial for people who are at the center of the stories they tell to also have a hand in how the stories are created. And this is just an illustration we have of Area Scatter, who was a Nigerian cross-dresser, if you know about Area Scatter. But what's we really do is sort of in three focus areas right now. So we have the publication, which is minorityafrica.org, where we publish every week stories from all across Africa. But we also have a fellowship program, which is great. And with the fellowship, we were able to, we've had a first cohort, and we're just about to launch a new cohort. And we've successfully been able to bring together journalists and storytellers with sometimes little to no experience in like reporting, but who have a very strong voice and have a very strong story to tell. And I'll show you some of our fellows shortly. But one other thing that our fellows also do, and what's a very strong part of our fellowship, is the tenet of solutions journalism. And so we really teach our fellows how to report stories about solutions, because that's the kind of publication that we are. And the final thing that we have is a news agency. So right now we're working with Google News Initiative on the Advanced project, and what we're essentially doing is because we publish our stories under a Creative Commons license, and we've had newsrooms that have told us, oh, we actually want to republish your content, right? And so we've been having these republications going on, but then currently we have about 14 newsrooms who are signed up, but the problem with that is it's been a bit manual, right? And so we've had to sort of upload a story on a drive, and then they download the story, and then they download the images. And so what we're doing with GNI right now with the Google grant is that we're actually building a web application, which we're going to launch next month, and that will mean that we can get even more newsrooms onto the platform to serialize our content essentially. So if you want to sign up, just like talk to me. I would actually be happy to sign you up. And so what's our impact like, right? And I'm really wary about how we define impact. I think that a lot of the ways that we define impact in journalism, do not essentially translate to like community journalism or sort of like smaller newsrooms. But I think for the kind of definition of impact that we know, right? So in terms of numbers, we still have to track those essentially. And so far, we've reached over 2 million people with our content. We launched in November 2019, so right before COVID-19. And the very first thing that I sort of did when I launched was be part of the lead fellowship from the Solutions Journalism Network, which Dina was also part of, and like just cool people all around. But we've also trained and engaged 150 plus journalists, right, on the continent. We have covered 150 plus stories, and like I said earlier, we have 14 newsrooms signed up to advance. And these are some of our fellows. So for the first cohort, we had fellows from Uganda and Ethiopia and Namibia and Cameroon, who really worked over 6 months to cover really great stories for us around disability and LGBTQ plus rights and the rights of refugees. We did some really great stories from the refugee settlements in Uganda, which we're really proud of. And some of the stories that we've covered, right? So there's this one that we did from Uganda, which was a look inside how an LGBTQ plus inclusive church was essentially opening its doors and was being led by queer people. And there's a one we just published from Nigeria about sort of like the organizations that are working at the forefront of ending the exploitation of like Nigerian migrant workers who were in the Middle East. And one recent one that we did that was about the groups that were tending to the graves of like survivors or people who died from like Namibia's colonial genocide, right? But what's really interesting about all of this is that when I started the publication, I was really thinking about if I wanted to sort of reframe how the media in Africa covers minorities, what would be my tools to do it? And if we know anything about the history of journalism, we know that it was sort of designed for the elites and to maintain a certain hegemony, right? And it still is to a great extent, right? And so if we kind of want to disrupt that system, it also entails us looking for new tools with which to sort of engage or sort of perform or sort of have that or catalyze that disruption. And one of such tools that I came across was solutions journalism, right? And why is this such a powerful tool? I think that for us, the realization, and if you're a member of any marginalized group, you kind of know that one of the very first things that gets taken away from you is like your agency, right? So people sort of think that you passively experience problems and people are sort of confined and perhaps even incentivized to always represent you from a lens of violence and sort of see you only as violence, right? And so it was very crucial for us that when people think about places like Uganda, which just passed a very crazy anti-LGBT bill, they also see how the communities are responding. And if you kind of look at how much overwhelming coverage has been, I mean, I lived in Uganda for a very long time, and if you kind of look at how much overwhelming the coverage has been about the new bill, I haven't seen as much coverage previously about how activists have been responding for so many years before this bill. And the reason is simple, right? Bad news sells in journalism, but more importantly for marginalized groups, there's a sense that we can only exist when it's violent, and we can only get representation when it's violent. And violence aligns with what people already think about us, and so it makes sense for that representation to be perpetuated, right? And with solutions journalism, what we're essentially able to do is sort of say, this is your agency, like you have a chance, we actually believe that you respond to problems. I don't think people passively experience problems, and every community is responding, at multiple times, right? And I guess the onus is on us, and what we kind of do now with our reporting is to sort of ask ourselves consistently, like, even if the narrative is not just how dare you be visible, but how dare you be visible, in a way that shows that you actually respond to your problems. And I think that has been a very focal point of our journalism. And it has sort of anchored a lot of the work that we've done in and around telling the whole story. And just to clarify, one thing people always say is, oh, but isn't it positive news, right? Aren't you essentially just taking away from the violence people experience or not covering it? And that's not true, because at the root of solutions journalism is a problem. And so you sort of begin from the problem and then you get into the solution. And what that allows you to do is that you're telling the same story, just with a different frame and lens, which is what we've been able to do at Minority Africa. So talk to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. Hi, everyone. So I have to learn how to move this. So my name is Dina, and I'm the founder of IGAB. Very briefly, IGAB is an online platform that enables local journalists across the Middle East and Africa to get published in regional and international media with a focus on solution journalism. So when I started IGAB in August 2020, I thought, oh, pandemic, let's start a new project. So when I started in August 2020, literally solution journalism with very little heard of in the Middle East specifically. Like were players in Africa, but in the Middle East there were almost non-existent or very few players. So when I first introduced the concept to Arab journalists, they would say, oh, that's very interesting and everything, but in our countries, we don't have solutions. Our countries only offer war, conflict, terrorism, etc. And as much as this was a sad thing to hear, it wasn't a surprise. It wasn't a surprise because we often forget that we as journalists, we're also audience to the media, right? So when you get this message sent over and over that this is the images and this is the stories you hear about your countries, that Egypt is about terrorism, human rights violations, corruption, Africa, poverty, Yemen, starvation and famine and war, Syria is war. And we're not saying that this does not exist. It does exist. But the problem is that when it becomes the only thing that exists in the way the media talks about it, it affects the way you see yourself. You start believing this. You start believing that this is exactly what I'm capable of. And it also affects any opportunities for development, any opportunities to break that vicious cycle. So I don't know if you're aware of the mindset theory in the book written by Professor Carol Dweck, who is an American psychologist, a professor of psychology at Stanford. And she coined this, I think it was 2006. She wrote that book based on research that she started in the 1970s, and that believing that in a growth mindset, people believe that their most basic abilities can be developed. Okay, it's not static. That brains and talent are just a starting point. Okay, that we can learn and develop. And this theory has been applied a lot in an educational setting. So there are a lot of experiments that have been done in schools. And when you think of it, I can't see any reason why we can't apply this also in the media. Because when you think of it, once you've finished your formal education years, really you learn from the media. This is how I learned about what's happening with the vaccines, what happens in other countries. Media become the way people learn about other things outside of their, the area of expertise. And what Dr. Dweck said is that there is a fixed mindset and there is a growth mindset. And I'm not you can Google this to learn more, but just to illustrate the point. So where a fixed mindset will think, oh, my potential is predetermined. That's it. I'm destined to be in a poor country, in a country that's marred by war, conflicts, divisions, etc. A growth mindset will look at it, okay, well, no, there is an opportunity for me to learn and develop. I can get out of that situation. While failure is a limit of my ability, here failure offers opportunity. And if you just take a quick look at this, you'll see that really the traditional problem-focused journalism is a form of a kind of like entrenches this fixed mindset, while it literally tells people, that's it, you're stuck there. I try to remember, because I used to work before I started IGAB, I used to work for the BBC for 14 years, and I remember at one time, I can't remember exact year, around 2017, 2018, the BBC did this report about Iraq, and it literally ended with a statement that says, along the lines, because I can't remember, I tried to Google it this morning, I was like, oh, I can't, which is like, this country is like destined or something like, there's no hope in something like this site for this country or something like this. And I remember when I saw this on TV along with my husband, I said, this is a very depressing statement. If I were an Iraqi and I was listening to that report, I would be depressed. It literally, the BBC, one of the most trusted news sources, is telling me there is no hope in sight for my country. And then we wonder why people don't develop or they see the only exit is to kind of leave these countries that are destined to failure as the media portrays to them. So in response to these journalists, when I started to speak to them about solution journalism, trying to convince them to try to give it a try, I gave them like what I thought was an advice to help them. I said, look at the area of your passion. Like if you're passionate about education, let's say, what exactly in education are you passionate about? Are you passionate about special needs education, about gender education? And then look who's doing what in that field. Trust me, If the problem is known, you'll most likely find at least one person, at least one entity that's trying to do something to fix this problem that you're so passionate about, but it's not getting enough media coverage, and that's your role. And guess what? Guess what happens? I mean, we've published over 100 stories. Okay, that's just a sample. I can put all of them. We've published a story from Yemen about this roving bus that goes from one camp to the other to educate refugees. You know, we have displaced people who keep moving from one city to the other due to the war. They can't continue their education because of this. We've published a story from Libya, actually the first ever solution story from Libya, that's on the Solution Journalism Tracker. And if you're not familiar with the Solution Journalism Tracker, Holly, you should explain more about that, where it's like it tracks the solution journalism stories that published was through IGAB, was by a journalist from Libya, because exactly we also have solution journalism deserts where we have certain countries, because again, they are rarely in the news for any solutions or reports about progress, they're always for conflicts. We've managed to publish stories from Libya about how this, for example, the story about how Libyans were protecting the forest. Did you even know that there was a forest in Libya? I didn't know. Okay, and so forth. And the result is that also the journalists who are struggling to find any stories, who told me very confidently in the beginning, we can't find solutions in our countries, are now pitching many stories, hundreds of stories. Actually, at one point, we said, okay, you have to slow down a bit because we're a very small team. We're only 4 people, so we're unable to be able to kind of like review all your pitches and give you feedback, so we have to slow down a bit. So yeah, and not just that, even the impact for the newsrooms. Many of our stories, we get feedback that they've performed really well. I mean, this is one of our struggles, the challenges, is that to actually convince media outlets to share their data with us, because they would say, oh, they did really well. I was like, how well exactly? I was like, no, we can't share this data. Anyway, but this is an example from a story in Botswana that the Guardian editor told us, the global development editor told us did very well to the extent that they put it in the print edition. We have another story from Syria that's long-listed for the One World Media Award and actually received offers from Italian NGOs, counterparts in Italy and Lebanon for help. So this is another impact. So you change the way journalists perceive their own countries, their mindset. You help also media outlets put out different stories that change the narrative, that shines a light about a different side that rarely gets covered. Again, we're not saying everything is perfect. I'm from Egypt, I'm telling you, everything is not perfect. Okay, we know that. But while we have problems, we also have many groups and people and entities are working on solving these problems. And they deserve that you know about them, okay? Because this is how stereotypes happen. When you just keep hearing certain things, you need to understand that they, like any other country, is diversified people. We have diversity. And it helps inform the audiences in different parts of the world about this. And it also helps shine light on the people who are working. So this is a very small NGO in Suwaida in Syria, and because of that report, they received offers of support. And that's it. This is just a sample of the journalists we've helped change their, we have 300 journalists across 32 countries now, and we're growing every day. And yeah, this is the impact of solution journalism.
Hi, everyone. I'm the 4th speaking. I am Dora Santos Silva. I'm a former journalist, and now I teach at Nova University in Lisbon, Portugal, and I coordinate the Observatory for the Media Innovation, OB Media. So I was going to share the impact that solution journalism have on students, journalists, and the community's coverage. But as we are short on time, I will stick to the impact of solution journalism in students that are now learning how to be good journalists in the future, and why solution journalism is a wonderful way to get them on the path of inclusion and equity, and also why is it so important in that time when they are being trained to for journalists, media organizations, associations, and the communities to partner with universities. Because we want to spread the messages to the future journalists while they are being trained, not after. Okay? So, in the last year and a half or so, I am teaching solution journalism in my university in a model of a curricular unit. And so far, I taught 78 students, 30 from the master's degree in journalism, and 48 from the bachelor's degree in communication sciences. And the main challenges so far, and I will say that the main challenges for the students are the same for the journalists that I trained also, okay? But the main challenges for students have been this. So first, get them out of their bubble, because, you know, we all live in bubbles, so this festival is a way to burst the bubble, okay? But unfortunately, it happens once in a year. But the students, although they are in a university, they don't have many ways to burst their bubbles. So teachers and media are, at that time, the few ways they can burst the bubble. So talking to different communities, different people, opening the university to the industry and the media will oblige them to get out of their comfort zone, okay? And solution journalism has they have to cover the problem, but also the solution, they have to interact with the communities and see how the solution is being implemented. And that is related to the second challenge, that is changing the ship. Because I don't know if you see this with your sons or friends or nephews, okay? But they want to be journalists, but they also avoid the news. And they also get news fatigue, okay? So there is a general emotion among these students, and they are in the university, that journalism has lost its credibility. And they want to fight it. They want to fight journalism as it's being seen by the communities, but they don't have the means to do that. So looking at solutions rather than just problems, looking at the real social issues and seeing what is being done gives them a sense of public service, okay? And mission and responsibility, and they are not used to have that kind of emotions. And that's why looking at solutions rather than problems is another challenge. And the last challenge is engage with the communities. And that is the most difficult one. So students engage a lot with everyone, but on their phones, okay? And that's fine. But staying with people, looking at their faces, talking to them, entering in their homes, it's really strange to them. Portuguese students, I don't know, but I have also Erasmus students and Brazilian students, so I think it's a general phenomenon. So they have to make a real effort to do that, to talk to different people. It can be surprising for you, but for example, I did a lot of interviews with the students to persons that have been in prison for murder or for a lot of crimes. And although the students were curious in talking to them, they didn't know how to talk to them. They didn't know how to start a conversation, okay, with them. So they don't know how to talk to homeless people. They don't know how to talk to immigrants. And now they won't be good journalists if they can engage with the communities that are being covered. So I spent the semester writing with them solution stories, and these are a few examples of the best ones. So they write about an association that effectively helps reintegrated people that stayed in prison. They wrote about a project that helps people with disabilities to re-engage with arts and culture. They wrote about a pilot clinical unit that prescribes social activities instead of drugs. They wrote about a community project that addresses immigrants' children needs, and they also wrote about a book editor company that spreads inclusive messages and gives voice to different authors. So these are only a few examples of what they did. And what's most important is their perception and their balance. So 100% of the students agree that solution journalists can alert the public more effectively to social issues than problem-oriented journalism. 85% of the students have never engaged with excluded groups, never talked to them before solution journalism. And 89% believe that solution journalism have more impact and is more fulfilling for their careers as a journalist and for the communities they live in. And this is just a few quotes from students. João, 21, solutions made me realize that there is so much we can do for this world. Joanna, 19, I had a wake-up call for things I didn't see that were right in front of my eyes. And Katerina, 22, this is the kind of journalism that I want to do, to be part of the solution by covering it. And another example, this is one of the stories that were published in a local newsroom that is called Mensagem de Lisboa that we partner with. They do internships there, for example. And the student who wrote this piece about that association that reintegrates people that have been in prison in an effective way, he gave me his testimony that I'm going to quote. When I asked Bartolomeu, that the person that you see here, a man in his 30s who had been imprisoned, how that association changed his life, he told me a little story. He had grown up in a loveless home with no access to books or movies. I have never thought about having dreams, he said. But when I arrived here at the association, the psychologists encouraged me to find one. It was hard. But one day I came to them and said, I have a dream. I want to go to a Pink concert. And he did. So João says, focusing my story on the solution made me realize how deep the causes can be. I never looked at people who have been in prison in the same way. So I think we are doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you all. We want to have this be as conversational as possible, so if you have questions, I know there's going to be some microphones floating around the room. I see right here. We'll take this question. And then to you next. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, and then to you.
Hi. Thank you so much. This is incredible. It's very inspiring, all of your stories. And I wish more newsrooms and more of us really take this solutions journalism into into our daily lives. Even if we are not covering solutions, I am a science journalist based in Brazil, and I try to bring solutions to the stories, the environmental stories I tell, even if I'm not talking about the solution specifically. So this is something I'm trying to embed And something that Dina was talking about, that people are very disengaged with the news because we are always talking about the problems and never about the solutions. And I was thinking this fixed mindset that you were talking about. So I want you to expand a little more about that. And if this kind of fixed mindsets that we spread around as journalists, if this is helping to erode the trust, the institutions, trust in science, trust in democracy, trust in human connections that we have seen. And if solutions journalism could be a solution, like to bring, distrust back in the institutions, in people, in journalism? Thank you.
So I can answer from the perspective of me being from the Middle East, from Egypt. One of the narratives of, let's say, not so democratic governments, okay, is that international media hates us. International media conspires against us because you always cover the bad news, right? And some people buy into this narrative. Of course, this does not mean that we should stop. We should still uncover corruption when it happens and all this. But I think when international outlets or media outlets in general, also local, but because this kind of narrative is always headed towards, these X or Y, they hate us. If then these media outlets start covering solutions when they happen, as well as the problems when they also happen, it takes away that narrative. Actually, the continuous problem-focused coverage that ignores solutions, in a way, without realizing, it empowers that narrative used by officials against international and any proper, independent, rigorous media outlets, right? And as I said, especially in countries like Egypt, with the level of education, although, yes, okay, we have people educated, but I call them the educated illiterates. Like, they finish school, but they haven't really learned anything, but this could be another session that we could speak about, quality of education. But I think, so this is one of the way that you can bring back trust, because I tell you, yes, this does break the bubble, the IJF, okay, but we have a huge bubble with the public, unfortunately, because still IJF, the audience are all people who, media practitioners, people who are interested in journalism, but no one is really speaking to the public, and especially in my part of the world, there is not so many conversations happening with the audience itself, and this is a problem, and that's why you leave them subject to such narratives that are told by the government, like different governments. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. To you?
My question has to do with a part of the definition shared at the beginning of the session, and this is about including government in the way we define actors that might generate solutions. And I would like to ask the panel, do you treat governments differently? I'm sure, I assume you do, because we're also very used to looking at governments or international organizations as sources of problems. At the same time, their job is always to come up with solutions. But then, if we start saying that this is an interesting response, this is how this government is responding, or the EU is responding, or this city is responding to a problem, we might be accused of being mouthpieces of this government. So that's a tough balancing act. And I often see in solutions journalism that journalists are more comfortable analyzing solutions of another government, not their own. But can we legitimately analyze our own government's responses as solutions? Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'll just answer this sort of broadly and then more context specific for me. So I think broadly that solutions journalism is also about it's critical and rigorous reporting, right? So it's not just saying the solution is present, but like what you're essentially analyzing the solution. And that's why it's very distinct from like positive news, because positive news, you're just saying this man went down the road handing candies to people, and that's great news, but it's not solutions journalism, right? And the other thing that I think is also important to say is that solutions journalism is also about solutions that do not work as well, right? So it's not just about the fact that something is working, it's about I think we're essentially all sort of zeroing on this fact that there is actually a response, and then your job as a reporter becomes, is it working or not? Which is in and of itself critical, right? And in that sort of dynamic of, is it working? Is then when you kind of have how you pay attention to like power. So like how does power, and I mean power as like power, not government power, but power as in power dynamics. So like how does power influence the solution that I'm looking at? Like what is the power relationship happening in this story and in this solution? And then I think that for minority Africa personally, it's something that we always grapple with, like when we're in a meeting and then someone says, oh, we have a pitch where someone says, oh, like my government is doing this solution, and we're like, because we really don't want to. And I think for us, it's essentially because, governments for so long have spoken, about marginalized groups, oftentimes even denying their existence. So in places like Uganda, where the president would say, oh, they're not gay people like in my country, which is a bold statement, but he said it so many times, right? And like, how do you know even, like, what are your, like, how did you survey your data? Anyway, but what I'm trying to say is, to sort of position ourselves and to ensure that we're having as many voices that are not represented get through as possible, we make a personal choice to rarely, if ever, talk about government solutions, right? And if we do, we're always putting people at the center, which I think is a very crucial part of our reporting. So how do people who are the most affected by this policy or the most affected by the solution or who are involved in the solution feel about it? And if there's no people, well, that's a question that we should be asking. So how are you implementing a solution sort of like in a silo and away from people? And I think as you think about sort of like when you think about how to ensure that you're effectively reporting on like solutions that happen with the government, I think one thing to keep at the back of your mind is just to ensure that you're as critical as possible, right? And not critical as in criticizing, but critical as in you're as analytical as possible in the story, which again is what solutions journalism is about. It's rigorous, it's critical, it's analytical, and you're essentially saying, oh, there's the solution, but how is it working, how is it not working? And more importantly, at least for me and for the publications that I work for and that I run, how does it impact people at the grassroots?
That thing, yeah. So I think we are used to be journalists as watchdogs, yeah. But our communities want us to be also service dogs, okay. And so in this metaphor, our communities want to know what our governments are doing wrong and what they are doing right. And solution journalism is not intention, so we are not covering an intention from a government. We are covering a solution that has evidence of being effective. And so we are doing a service to our community, saying that this government is doing this wrong and it's doing this right. So we can provide insights to other governments to do the same thing. So we journalists, I am always with journalists. So we have to change that ship, okay?
Sorry, I just wanted to first say the passion you guys have about your projects is so admirable. Like, it's nice to see the passion. My question, and I want your advice on this. I'm a Muslim. I'm not a terrorist. But I say that because a lot of people in London and the UK are scared of Muslims, that we are all violent people. Now, I create content on social media to show the good and positive stories that Muslims are doing across the world. Now, when I try and take these stories to the media or news desks, I really find it hard to get coverage. Like, it's always the negative stories. My question is, can you help me and give me some advice as to how to pitch the positive stories, apart from my Instagram platform, but for the media? Thank you.
Thank you. I think, as Caleb said, the impact could be that you end up with a positive feeling, but we're not after positive stories or good stories, right? We're after investigating solutions, looking at a response to a problem that has been implemented and explaining to people if it worked. First, is there evidence? Like, very quickly, there are 4 pillars for solution journalism, really. There has to be a response that has been implemented. There have to look to show through your story the evidence of whether this response is working or not. And then you have to provide insights about why does it work, the lessons learned from this solution, because for me at least, the ultimate goal of any solution journalism story we want to do is to inspire others in other communities who are facing a similar problem to replicate this solution in the context that, while adapting, certain things so that it fits their context, but at least show them that there is a way forward. And of course, the last thing is the limitations, because there is nothing such as a perfect solution. So I think, just to answer your question, I think the problem with you pitching to the media a positive story is that, no serious media outlet will take just a positive story. We're not into that. We're into serious, rigorous, evidence-based approach. So I like to see it as a way to investigate solutions. So it's traditional investigative journalism uncovers problems that we do not know, right? Corruption, something going wrong, while you kind of like also investigate whether truly this response works or not. And it's okay, as Caleb said, to reach the conclusion this response does not work. That's fine.
My name is Salam Omar. I'm from Iraq. And so I have two questions for you. Actually, there are two challenges for solution journalism. One of them is actually we cannot apply solution journalism to every story. So that's one of the very good questions coming out within the trainings actually we have had. And this is actually, I want to know and hear from your experience what are you going to do with that. That's one question. The other one is if you go through the pillars, actually there are limitations, but there's also some space for misusing solution journalism, for using it as a marketing, using it as PR for governments and authoritarian regimes. So I think that's also those I would like to hear from you just to comment on those points. Thank you.
So regarding the second question, all journalism can be object to PR and marketing. So if we stay impartial and independent, we can do good solution journalism. As it is bad and good journalism, there is bad solutions, so journalism or good solution journalism. So we have to stick to the good solution journalism, not to make favors to governments or institutions, because this isn't solution journalism. And of course, not all the stories can make solutions journalism, because there aren't solutions to all the issues. For example, I think in Europe, and I don't know in other capitals, we are facing a huge crisis in housing, okay? Because people can get house at a budget that is, no, I don't know. It's really hard to get a home in Lisbon, for example, or in other capitals of the world. And for example, students that come to universities to get trained, they don't have money to even a room, not a house. So this is a problem, for example, that there aren't many solutions to address that problem. So when they are, we need to cover, to learn from each other, okay? But solution journalism is not the key to all stories or all social issues.
Hi, hola, my name is Camille. I'm founder of 9 Millones in Puerto Rico, and a proud solutions journalism trainer. I wanted to ask about how has solutions journalism helped with the sustainability of your outlets?
I got so excited. Okay, so I think now it's a bit business more than journalism. There is a business rule when you, in the entrepreneurship world, when you start a business, the first question you have to answer is like, what is the problem that you're solving, right? You start with a problem. So most of the time, and that's why I'm a journalist. Right? I've been 14 years with the BBC before I started IGAP. But which was interesting. So you see many journalists who say, I want to launch a media outlet, which is great. Okay, great. What is this media outlet? What is the gap it's filling or the problem that it's solving? And for whom? Did the audience come to you and tell you we're missing that media outlet? So this is the thing, is that solution journalism, for me, at IGAP, for example, it fills a gap. It fills a need. So IGAP's business model is a bit different. So it helped us because so we're like, you can look at us as a news agency, right? But instead of hiring employees, we have journalists. We have all these freelancers on the ground, and they pitch us their stories, and then we feed these stories to the different media outlets, right? So we're the person in the middle. So for us, it helped us with sustainability is that this is a gap in the market, this kind of stories coming from this region. And it helps also the journalists because we help young journalists. And these journalists, the market is really busy, right? So it helps them stand out of the crowd when they bring a different story. So when you pitch a story about, yet again, human rights violations in Egypt, again, it's important, but there are many people, unless you're finding something different, something new, a new case, whatever. But so it will be, well, I already have a correspondent that I deal with in Egypt. But when you come with a completely different story that no one knew about before, the chances of your pitch getting commissioned is higher. So for us, it helped with that because I think we're filling a gap, we're solving, and the other model, because we help media, journalists reach international media outlets that we are solving a problem of access. So this is the problem that we're solving. But yeah.
And I think the Solutions Journalism Network actually has a research that we're featured in about how solutions journalism has helped certain newsrooms sort of like raise money and become sustainable. So that's a resource that's probably helpful as well instead of seeing, because we talk very deeply in that report about how solutions journalism being a part of our model was also crucial to how we're able to sort of like raise funding for the organization.
Gracias.
Hi, I would quickly like to share an anecdote from 2014. I was a young one, so I was a very passionate youth worker at that time. So it's came the flag, Islamic flag of Britain. Train the youngsters to become positive role models. On the same day, coincidentally, there were two youngsters from Cardiff who went there. The people have done so much good work, and they've done some great work. This is the counter-narrative. This may be the solution for you. We had about 1% of the coverage of those two guys who got the 6,000. And if I wish the solution journalism was in vogue then, because over the coming years and many more went and joined and there was nothing to balance out. Now, my question to the panel is, how do we get these stories out? And I see some outlets here. Hopefully I can speak to the people who are in charge to get through to it. But how do we balance out these minority of minority going out and doing bad things, and when there are perceived solutions there, it does not get any coverage whatsoever?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think that a lot of times we actually sort of like talk, and that's a great question because I think it's something that we're always thinking about. But we talk a lot about the sort of like the onus falling on minorities to quote unquote advocate for their own representation, right? And that's what I found problematic, like in the very first place. Like, why is the responsibility on people from marginalized groups to sort of defend why their story matters or why their story belongs like in a particular place? And I think just sort of turning that sort of framework around and turning that lens around to then focus on like editors and newsroom managers. And so like if you're an editor or like you're a publisher or you're an owner of a media platform, you know, if you're not actively trying to sort of remove as many barriers as possible, then you're contributing to the problem. So if someone pitches a story to you and you're like, oh my God, they have no journalism experience, so they can't write the story, you're contributing to the problem. That's honestly what I think. I think that diversity and everything we're talking about is not an easy process, right? It doesn't come by, you know, people want to be diverse and still do things the way they do them. People want to be diverse and still report what they normally report, right? And so I think for your question, just the responsibility should not essentially be on you. It should be more on the news managers, on the publishers, on the editors who actively, you know, by sort of refusing certain voices to get in through the door, contribute to this framework in which, you know, we're having more like negative. So for instance, with Minority Africa, every single time that we discuss a pitch every Tuesday, we don't ever say, oh, where has a journalist been published before? Because for us, we think that everybody has a story to tell, right? And sometimes the story will show up or will come to a person who has really nothing before, but it doesn't matter, right? You have a story to tell, and you should tell a story to us. And sometimes they have no writing experience. We have resources for them. We have, like, we do share like a lot of things, and we edit actively. So we spend so many months with drafts because we're editing in drafts for people who have never written a piece before in their life. And I think it's similar with like Iga Resol, who has so many like first-time writers. So I wish that we would talk more about your question, but I wish that we would do it from the lens of the publishers and editors, who are the people that are actively contributing and sort of like maintaining or sustaining the system that basically keeps out certain people.
Yes, but you addressed a really important issue, that's diversity, and the social representations that we have of Muslims, immigrants, anyone, refugees, and so on. These social representations are mediated by the media. So solution journalism can contribute to balance that kind of social representations that we have. Because the traditional coverage is about problems, okay? Problems to the countries that, for example, receive immigrants or refugees. And if we look at solutions coverage, how do that immigrants help our countries, how we can learn from each other, and so on, we can contribute to balance that representation. Because all prejudice, all inequity that is happening in the world is mediated by and empowered by the media. So solution journalism can help balance that.
Thank you. That is an excellent way to bring this panel to a close. Thank you. I want to thank the panelists and thank all of you.